Hello, and before we start today's video, I just wanted to share with you guys something I've been mulling over for quite some time. Now, as you can see here on screen, on the left hand side we have pictures of NAS or NAS, a wrapper that's been knocking around for more than 30 years, not to be confused with Little Nas. This guy has won all manner of awards. I'm sure you've heard of him, or at least heard some of his music. And on the right hand side of the screen you have NAS drives, devices that have got those hard drives inside, or SSDs, to create your own private server. And then I started going down this certain train of thought, because I was thinking, well, surely everyone Googles themselves. Let's face it, in the dark cold of the night, you want to know what the world thinks of you, and of course, you Google yourself. And so I started Googling. So I started first, I looked up NAS reputation, because maybe he would like to know his reputation. And then while I was looking at it, I was like, oh, there's one of my articles there on NAS Compare. So what about if we look up NAS popularity? Because he must want to know how popular he is, right? And then boom, there's another one of the articles. There's another one of the articles. As arrogant as this is starting to sound here, I started to see a slight trend there. And then I was like, oh, what about NAS news? Because he's going to, stay up to date with what's going on with himself. And then I was looking at NAS news, and boom, there at the bottom, there is the DS723 in one of my articles. So I was sort of thinking, so do you know what? I decided, what about NAS 2023? You might want to look up what's going on with his tour, who's following it and stuff. So I looked up NAS 2023, and as you can see, it's trying to correct us. But I went in, and then boom, there's NAS Compare at the top. So I started thinking, there's probably a decent percentage that this fantastically famous rapper has actually seen my face several times while Googling himself, and thought, who the hell is that guy? Indeed, when you go into the images then, you look at NAS, 2023, it does pop up the pages on there. So I went one step further. I decided, you know what? Let's go to the guy's Wikipedia page and see what we've got in common. And it turns out it's a few little things. For example, one of the first things I found out in 1994 to 1998, he was making the difficult transition into the firm along with a number of his peers, with a lot of changing in the rap scene. And I myself was having difficulty at school at that time, dealing with puberty, dealing with hairs, trying to work up the courage to ask out Kara Laycock. The similarities are uncanny. And then further on, when you go down to his feuds and you scroll down, you notice that he had a big feud with Jay-Z, and they were formerly friends. And myself personally, I loved 99 Problems, listened to it to death, until one of the flats I was living in, a neighbour played it on repeat till 3 a.m. Can't stand the song now. It was really strange, the amount that we had in common. Unfortunately, it turns out we have one big difference in problem, and that is to do with business ventures, because unfortunately he invested quite heavily in Dropbox, and me personally, I will always pick NAS over cloud. So unfortunately, NAS, I just don't think we're going to be friends. But if you are passing a fancy cup of tea, 2 sugars? Hello, and that fantastically arrogant introduction aside, this is my before you buy on the Synology DS723 Plus 2 bay, or a should you buy, depending on whether you're on the fence about going for this brand new premium 2 bay from Synology. Now, normally by now on launch day of these products, I would have the full review up and running, but unfortunately, we've not finished the testing. We're still going through the process of the testing. The review will hopefully be arriving within the next week or so. It'll be detailing everything, a little bit of DSM, a little bit of hardware, a little bit of software, a little bit of Plex, the works, along with all the other videos that come afterwards. So in the interim, while you're waiting for that, I wanted to do the before you buy first. And this is where I'm going to give you 5 reasons why the DS723 may well be the perfect NAS for you, and 5 reasons why you might want to remain on the fence and see what else Synology or the other brands have got in store for 2023. Let's crack on with number 1. That is right, it's probably one of the most standout things about this NAS, not only against the devices that came before it in Synology's 2 bay series, but just generally towards 2 bays in the disk station like family period over the last 2 decades from the brand. This system has the option of upgrading to 10 GBE. Now there are some of you that will quibble that it should really have had 10 GBE by default. There is, unlike a lot of the 4s and the 6 and the 8 bays, I think there is a little bit of argument back and forth for that. But the very idea that this 2-bay disk station can be upgraded to a 1000 megabytes per second external connection is tremendously impressive. It is worth bearing in mind, of course, this is a 2-bay NAS system that utilises SATA hard drives or SSD. So there is the question of whether a device like this has even got the capability of fully saturating that 1000 megs. You're certainly not being capped once you're utilizing it, but at the same time, 2 SATA drives together in hard drive form, you might get somewhere between 350, maybe 450 megabytes per second. A couple of SATA SSDs in the right RAID, you might do well and get maybe 650. That's probably as high as you're going to get there, but it's when you introduce things like the benefits towards write caching, utilizing M.2 SSDs, or utilizing M.2 NVMe's in other ways, something we'll of course touch on later, and utilising the expansion of the DX517, not only does this system therefore, in those upgraded scenarios, give you the capability to fully saturate the 10 GBE, but the fact this 2-bay, this far of a modest 2-bay, that allows you to take advantage of tremendous improvements in hard drive technology to jump on board with huge hard drives these days in just that 2-bay form, allows you to leverage the amount that you were going to spend on this NAS for home or business more towards the storage than it is to the NAS itself, scaling it into that 2-bay, and then down the line take advantage of higher performance for about $139 to $149 depending on where you are in the world. Now, Synology have done 10 GBE upgrades in the rest of their series before. Indeed, there is that simple 100 to 122 port adapter upgrade there, but it's the fact that it's this small form 2-bay that allows a 10G upgrade when Synology have been, frankly, very distant on the form of greater than gigabit connectivity. It's nice to see. Maybe if they'd rolled it in and up the price, who's to say? But given that it's a 2-bay and you will need to scale up your storage in a few ways to saturate 10 GBE, to me it makes a lot more sense that it's an optional 10 GBE option on this 2-bay than I would have said about the larger disk station devices. Next up, another big upheaval in the development of this product compared with its predecessors before it is the upgrade towards ECC Memory. Error correcting code or error code correction is memory that much resembles normal memory that you know it. However, it also arrives with an additional module on board that memory, and what that does is as data is being passed through and written to the device, a checksum, a little bit of parity data is created during the beginning of the transfer, held on that extra chip for the extra space, and then as data is passed through the memory, it is then compared against that original template, that original blueprint, and if there are any differences in that data, it is then repaired to its original form before it is written to the system. This allows warm and even cold storage to maintain significantly higher percentage of its integrity and lower the possibility of failure, ultimately falling to things like bit rot in this system, and therefore having much more integrity rich data going into your system long term, and not have that nagging doubt when you're doing large scale high frequency low volume or vice versa transfers onto the NAS, that you're not running the risk that 5, 10, even 15, 20 years down the line that data may have an inconsistency that will come back to bite you on the bum. So yes, ECC memory on this system, we're going to talk about it a little bit more later on, but I will say straight off the outset that Synology have clearly designated the DS723 Plus with a little bit more of a business profile and identity to it than any of the 2-bays that have come before it. Of course, I was going to talk about it. DSM Disk Station Manager 7.1. It is probably the main reason that a lot of people make the switch to Synology, because Synology, when it comes to their, their portfolios, I think it would be very safe to say, especially on the Disk Station portfolio, that they maybe play it a little safe, maybe take their foot a little bit off the gas when it comes to hardware when compared against other brands in the market. But it is the software from Synology and DSM that really stands out. Currently in DSM 7.1, we did a full updated review, I think in December, like a full hour 20-minute long, covering pretty much all the features. But to summarize it even briefly, 1, incredibly user friendly. 2, it is a full central ecosystem platform. So unlike just utilizing software that is locked into just a single device, DSM is designed to be an ecosystem. It's designed to have replacement applications for a lot of third-party tools that you'll be utilizing in home or business communication, email, documents, everything, just whatever you're utilizing. there is almost certainly, if not a Synology app for it now, then at the very least ways to convert and export that data into the Synology ecosystem. Again, the collaboration suite involving Office, involving chat, involving Drive, involving mail, calendar, the works. It's all rolled in with client applications for your desktop, Windows, Mac, Linux, Android and iOS devices. All of those are readily available. Alongside that, you've got premium business level apps like Active Backup Suite, which not only allows backup routines and a whole single portal management of backups between all of your client hardware. There's also synchronized SaaS, software as a service platforms like Google Workspace and Office 365 to synchronize that data natively in account and detailed form in the way you're used to it with the NAS, allowing you to have an on-premises bare metal server that is doing all of the synchronization with those cloud services. In the event of an internet downage in your home or office environment, when you're utilizing those services, you can still use them natively on your client hardware within Google and Microsoft Office interfaces and all those apps, making the data communication with the NAS, and when the internet is restored over here, the NAS will re-establish that connection. So again, that intelligent caching and on-site management in communication with those third-party services and integration into Synology's first-party services cannot be underestimated. Along the same goes for their virtual machine manager tool, which does very similar to PAAS and SaaS VM services. Again, VMware, Hyper-V, stuff like that, they can all be integrated and synchronized with, and in some cases with the option to then mount an image of those third-party services in the event of severed internet connectivity locally as well. You've then got Surveillance Station 9, a premium level surveillance package for cameras around your home or business, as well as supporting other IP or internet network connected devices for security and home protection and business protection. I cannot stress enough how much of a complete package and ecosystem DSM is. It's not just the operating system on your NAS. It's not just a splash screen that allows you to knock around with your data. It is a fully fledged ecosystem and operating system in one. That is what you're getting with a Synology NAS. And in DSM 7.1 and 7.2 in beta very, very soon, on the DS723, you are looking at a small compact NAS that gives you access to all of the features of the platform. Another thing I'll highlight right now is that DS723 Plus is not only exceptionally well ventilated, as the images in the review, the written reviews done, linked below and hopefully on screen, with ventilation on the base of the system, in key areas along on the side of the system, and a single low noise fan on the rear. But on top of that, it runs quiet. Right now, while I've been talking to you, the DS723 Plus is approximately 2 meters away, populated by two Synology HAT 5300 16TB drives. You may hear those drives clicking in the background just ever so slightly, but the system itself runs very quietly. It is a plastic chassis all the way around, encasing a metal internal structure, but because it's this 2-bay with only 2 bays inside, and because of the fantastic ventilation and placement of heatsinks inside, it does run very low noise. I'm not going to say it's silent, but it's definitely one of the quietest Synologies I've utilised in a very long time. I kind of alluded to this one earlier on in the video, but it has to be said that in the case of the DS723, much like we saw the DS923, it is one of the earliest examples of Synology allowing you to use M.2 NVMe's as storage pools. As mentioned, this is where performance on this system will be opened up tremendously compared with traditional hard drives there. What I mean by that is, at the base of the system, there are two M.2 2280 length M.2 NVMe slots. They are PCIe Gen 3 x 4 in architecture. More on that later. Now, these slots allow you to install 2 of these superfast SSDs, at least comparative to hard drives as well, with performance in the thousands of megabytes per second. And then from there, not only, much like most other Synology NAS, allow you to create an area of caching for read and write caching to improve the performance in either direction in a number of ways with your data, but also create storage pools, much like you can with the hard drive bays. What I mean by that is that you can have the main hard drive storage pools there, which are going to be larger capacity, lower price per terabyte, but much slower in performance until you get lots of them in a RAID, or individual M.2 SSDs that These can be used either together in a RAID for a high performance storage pool for all of your data and running apps from, or you can run one as a super fast storage pool and the other drive for read caching if you choose. So it has to be highlighted that this is not a feature currently available on many Synology NASes. Almost certainly it's a feature we're going to slowly see arriving in every follow-up system after this, and M.2 NVMe Storage Pools have been available for quite a while on other brands, it has to be said. But it's still great that Synology have finally embraced this. They've certainly not embraced it in the smoothest way, something I'll touch on later on, but still nonetheless, the option to utilise the M.2 NVMe storage pools on a NAS, and particularly this 2-bay, thereby effectively turning this 2-bay into a 4-bay NAS system, cannot be overlooked. And again, running apps from these, and particularly crucial databases, like if you're going to be utilising the CMS platform, which is creating large high numbered file but low scale size data storage arrays or VMs, this is going to be perfect for running those performance heavy and latency low point applications from the system. But it's not all good. There's going to be things about the DS723 that aren't for everyone. So alongside those 5 great things that I highlighted, let's talk about the 5 things about this device that may force you to want to sit on that fence just a little while longer. Unfortunately, that is right. As soon as I've just started talking about how much I love M.2 NVMe storage pools on the DS723, it has to be said that the way this has been presented and delivered on this system is actually weirdly disappointing. The first thing we've noticed about it, and again, we will be going into more depth here, but with the 923 Plus, what we saw when we delved into that utilising PuTTY, we saw that even though the bays inside were PCIe Gen 3 × 4 each, thereby opening the doorway to 4,000 megabytes per second bandwidth, they had been capped at 3 × 1 by the system. And they've done that, and there's lots of different reasons knocking around online with people talking to Synology, and Synology reps giving, in some cases, unofficial statements on this to do with cooling on the system and the high temperatures that can be reached with M.2 NVMe's when they're utilised for storage pools. I'm not sure how I feel about that on the system. I know there is active cooling throughout the chassis, and maybe it would require a big change in the way they've developed that chassis, which has existed without this feature prior to this point, and therefore temperature rises would need to be readdressed in the chassis design. But still, nonetheless, this is something, you know, greater than 3 × 1 performance has been available with M.2 NVMe's as storage pools from other storage brands for quite a while. It seems really odd to me that Synology have released this feature in this way, but then it's arrived on the scene with a cap that you see when you log in via PuTTY on SSH on BIOS. Other things to bear in mind as well. Currently, at the time of recording, you can't boot DSM from the M.2 NVMe's. If you have the system with only the M.2 NVMe's in those slots and no hard drives, you can't download and you can't initialize the system. So you can't run DSM from the M.2 NVMe's despite their high performance and no doubt the benefits it would bring to DSM as a whole. I wouldn't be surprised though if that's something that Synology integrate down the line. Something I'll be a little more surprised is the fact that currently you can only use Synology's own M.2 NVMe's for storage pools, and that really irked me. I think at the end of 2022 when we were doing our M.2 NVMe performance testing of the DS923 Plus, what we saw was you could only use their drives. I tried lots and lots of different drive models, and in all of those tests what we found was that if we use those, it saw the drives were there, but it wouldn't allow us to use it. It would say these drives have been unverified by Synology at this time, and therefore they cannot be used for storage pools. Now, will Synology change their policy on these third-party drives down the line for this feature? I'm not 100% certain, because Synology has made moves in the last 18 to 24 months to be a little bit more proprietary in some cases, a little bit more prioritous of their own first-party hardware there, which again is their remit, and you know they are testing these things. They can't test every bit of hardware in the world, and obviously their own hardware is what's going to get tested first. But still, nonetheless, the fact that you've got this great feature to use finally those M.2 NVMe storage pools on these systems, but they are seemingly capped at the moment. They cannot be used to boot the OS, and you're restricted in the SSDs you use, does kind of water down and make this great hot feature just a little bit lukewarm for me. Revisiting that subject of memory, it's worth highlighting that the DS723 Plus arrives, I hate seagulls, it arrives with 2 gig of memory by default, which, although is enough to run the system early doors, it should be said that DSM, when it's running a few applications, can get a little greedy. And given that the DS923 Plus arrives with 4 gig by default, that, to me, I don't see why they've decided very early doors to cap this thing at 2 gig, particularly when that 2 gig module can be removed and there are 2 available slots. Unlike predecessors where they soldered that memory, this one arrives with 2 slots. One of them is occupied by 2 gig of DDR4 ECC memory. And 2 gig, what are you going to do? Stick in an 8 gig and have 10 gig of memory and not pair the modules? It's not as important as it used to be to have paired modules, but it's still a speed and, a transmission factor that some people still bear in mind. And then on top of that, with that 2 gig, once again, like the M.2 NVMe, Synology are pretty strict about utilising only their memory inside their systems. They've been quite, upfront about this. If you are using third-party memory from brands like Crucial, from brands like Kingston, from brands like Sabrent, if you use their memory modules, you run the risk of them of your support being invalidated by Synology. And what they detail on that is, if something goes wrong with your system and you're using third-party memory, and it can be ascertained that third-party memory was in any way to do with the failure of the system, you are using the system in a way that they have not advertised. You are using the system in a way where they did not guarantee or state that it can do that thing, because you are using it outside of what they consider a supported, confirmed and verified configuration there. So again, I'm really pleased about ECC Memory, and I'm really pleased that I can get up to 32 gig of memory on this system. I'm less pleased on the fact that it starts with 2 gig, which is going to be useless to me down the line, which is a bit wasteful if you ask me, especially when there are memory shortages right now that you are going to see, by the way, playing out into 2023. You're going to see more NAS models arriving with 8 gig by default, by the way, or you're going to start seeing memory prices spike dramatically. On top of that, the fact I can only go for their memory, which already, in some cases, is 4 to 5 times the price point of the memory mentioned elsewhere. Yes, it's ECC, which means, enterprise-wise, it's going to cost more, but even factoring in the ECC memory, it seems to be just a little bit too expensive for me. Come on, we always had to talk about it, that processor. A number of you watching this may have wondered why I've not actually addressed the point till now, but let's face it, let's get straight into it. The DS723 Plus, much like the DS923 Plus, when it was first kind of leaked / revealed, whatever you want to call it, back in October, November of 2022, one of the things that really took a lot of people back is the fact the CPU no longer was an Intel Celeron quad-core integrated graphics processor, a CPU that had been used in this family in one shape or form for the better part of 8 to 10 years. Having an integrated CPU inside there means that if you are running processes that are a lot more graphical in nature, OpenGL, transcoding, encoding, multimedia converting, all of those processes, they were done a great deal more efficiently and therefore utilising less CPU power, and therefore the system doing them better, faster and with a lower impact in power consumption on a CPU that had integrated graphics. The DS723 Plus arrives with the AMD embedded Ryzen dual core R1600. This CPU here has got a tremendously great clock speed there at 2.6 gigahertz base. They can be burst up to 3.1 gigahertz. It also, although a dual core, is a quad thread processor there. It doesn't have integrated graphics, and even now, after all this time, there are still a lot of people weighing up, ECC memory, optional 10 GBE, M.2 NVMe Storage Pools. But that processor, it's not a bad CPU. The R1600, although it's a little power hungry on the TDP and just general clock speed, it is a great file processing CPU. It does run pretty much all of the DSM applications great, but it's only when you're running processes where you're forced to use graphical processes where this CPU falters. Probably one of the most common examples of that is Plex Media Server, and a number of users who are hoping to go for this or the DS923 Plus as an ideal 2022-2023 generation Plex Media Server, were just a little bit disappointed, because if they are running setups where they need client-side transcoding, client-side conversions, not client, sorry, server-side converting and server-side transcoding and encode and converting, this CPU is not going to do that job very well. Examples of when you're going to need that: you may be running a 4K file on HEVC on your intended NAS there. You've got an H.265 HEVC, even, you know, more acceptable H.264, which doesn't have the issues of licensing, but you're playing it back on the device that doesn't support 4K, doesn't support that particular compression or codec, is a smaller device, you know, like a mobile phone that has a small screen that you're watching while you're on the commute or on holiday, and you don't want to download a 12 gigabyte media file to watch. You want the NAS to convert it into something small, send it to your phone so you can watch it on this screen. In those scenarios, not having an integrated graphics CPU is going to be a limitation, but it should be said that if you're playing native and you are playing H.264, so no license required of HEVC, or you're running a system that's got client-side licensing or client-side hardware conversions in place, the CPU is not going to be a problem in those scenarios. This is a good CPU, but there's no denying that that R1600 CPU has been quite divisive since its launch with a number of users. Those network ports by default, again, as chuffed as I am to have a 10 gigabit Ethernet port and the fact that I can then communicate up to 1000 megs with this system, it's an option. By default, it's got 1 GBE again. And back in 2020, when I was reviewing the predecessor to this device, one of my big complaints, and again, not as important as a larger system, because we are still talking about a 2-SATA disk system here, was it arrived with 1 gigabit Ethernet. There are 2 of them, so things like link aggregation or multi-channel allow you to combine them to get greater bandwidth, but still nonetheless, 1 GBE in 2023, when most, and by most I mean all other NAS brands, are rolling out their competitive systems to this with 2.5 GBE, the exact same cost as 1 GBE, means that the 723 arriving with 1G by default is quite disappointing. To make matters even worse on that as well, we're seeing the growth of 2.5 GBE a lot more in home ISP routers, in laptops, in computers, all arriving with 2.5 GBE by default. Sorry about the noise there, it's raining right now on the roof. And then on top of that, we're seeing adapters from companies like StarTech producing $15 2.5G to USB adapters there. We're seeing USB to 5GB adapters knocking around for 50 to 60 nicker. And with a lot of users wanting to communicate directly with the NAS, taken offline entirely, or wanting to edit files on the NAS via things like iSCSI or using Synology Drive and editing files with non-linear editing, it's really annoying that this system still arrives with 1 GBE, and there are people out there, of course, that will maintain that 2.5 GBE is a fad. It's kind of a quirky thing. Why not jump straight up to 10? And you're right. Maybe they should jump straight up to 10, but that's the point. They didn't. They put it as an option. They should have increased the price, 50 to 100 quid and put 10G by default, or increase those network ports a little bit, because if I want to communicate with the NAS on greater than gigabit network there, I don't want to have to muck around with lagging. And moreover, if you have a greater than 1 gigabyte internet connection, greater than 1 gigabit internet connection in your home, which is becoming, thanks to fiber, a great deal more common, it's super annoying that this NAS has the potential, via one of those 1 GBE ports, to be a lower speed than an internet connected drive outside of your home or business environment. And this is a weird one that I genuinely didn't realise until I had the device on the table unpacking it for the first half of the review that I filmed. It's only got 1 USB port. I'm already kind of wound up that Synology on all of their devices are still using USB 3.2 Gen 1, when we're seeing a lot of client hardware arriving in 2022 and 2023 with USB 4 on board, but their systems arriving with USB 3.2 Gen 1, so 5 gigabits per second USB, already knocked me when all the other NAS brands are rolling out USB 2 Gen 2 at 10 gigabit, but then only having 1 USB port on the front. And then within DSM, we've noticed in the last 12 months, them really streamlining, and that's going to be a nice way to put it, but lowering the range of compatible devices with USB. So network adapters over USB, not just ones that would increase the network connection there, gone. Using storage drives, great, but you've only got one port to connect it to. And if you're going to use it for, you know, a smart UPS that isn't going to be network enabled, you've only got one port to play with. Yes, you can put it into a multi-plug adapter there, but you're still running into a 5 gigabits per second connection. You can't even use wireless dongles anymore. Well, we're starting to see Wi-Fi 6 and even developing, as we speak, Wi-Fi 6E dongles arriving on the scene. So it really surprises me that this system, this 2-bay, only has one USB port on the front. They've lowered the range of compatible USB devices, and it is USB 3.2 Gen 1. I'm very surprised, and although I actually quite like that CPU outside of the integrated graphics, and I like the 10GB upgradability and the ECC memory and DSM as a whole and M.2 NVMe pools. It has to be said that this system arrives with just a number of weird niggling things that I think Synology could stand to be a little louder about. But this has been my before you buy, or should you buy, on the Synology DS723 Plus. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I know this has run on for about, I think, probably close to 25-30 minutes, but we've covered a lot. In the review, we are going to cover a whole lot more, including a lot of the DSM stuff and capabilities in the can and cannot do's about this system. So do stay tuned for that, hopefully in the next week or so. If you want to learn more, subscribe to the channel, or visit in the description links to all of the articles we've got at the moment on the DS723 Plus. These range from comparisons to the old generation and competitor devices, as well as guides and the full review, which is already finished, over on NAS Compares, linked below. Click like if you enjoyed the video, it really helps us out. If you need free advice or support or some guidance on what you're doing with your data storage startup, home or business, and you want it for free, use the free advice section linked over on NAS Compares, link below. It's on the right hand side of the screen, big blue button, or the free community forum at Ask NAS Compares, run by me, Eddie, who does most of the work on there, I'll be straight with you, and other members of the NAS community to answer your questions. And finally, if you found this video helpful, very important, and if you were planning to go to Amazon anyway, please use the links in the description to take you there. The links to Amazon below will take you directly to Amazon in your region, and then from there, anything you buy, and I really do mean anything, results in a little kickback coming back here to NAS Compares, ran by me and Eddie, just us two, and it allows us to continue doing what we do. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.